Good evening. Thank you for joining us for building an agentic enterprise for the modern workforce. My name is Ben Kessler, and I'm CEO of 66 Degrees. And I'm really grateful to be joined by two of my esteemed colleagues and really forward thinkers in AI transformation. Josh Sutton, Chief Innovation Officer at 66 Degrees, and then Tanvir Danish, Executive Vice President and Global Head of our Data and AI practice. At 66 Degrees, we're a business that help companies walk through their AI transformation. What we're going to talk about today is actually building an agentic enterprise, what the next stage of an agentic enterprise is. Try to flip through my slides here, and so there was our introduction. Our first question, and I'd love to start with Tanvir on this, is oftentimes we go on journeys and you have to figure out where you're going in order to figure out where you're starting. And so a lot of us start with AI, and a lot of us start with building agents really without an end in mind. So Tanvir, could you talk a little bit about what is the end of the agentic enterprise? Where is all this headed?
Yeah, Ben, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here. As far as agentic enterprise from an end game perspective is concerned, for a moment I would like to envision and take a step back and say, let's say you are the enterprise, irrespective of agentic or not. What is your end goal? And I would presume that it's to win the market share. And so when I think about this question, my point of view is this is not as simple as I want to optimize my P&L, I want to cut my cost, but a little more motivational, because if all it took was, let's say, a better version of every employee in the enterprise to win the market, then horses, the best versions and most motivated version of horses would still win races against race cars. They don't. And so my summation here is that the end game needs to rely on something bigger. The bigger in this context is to unlock the creativity to launch offerings in the market that our consumers and clients love. And so how do you build an agentic tooling around that such that it can increase the experimentation, you can drive towards business outcomes, and all of this while optimizing the unit economics and the cost under the hood to deliver most amount of value in the market. So to me, it's the unlocking of that creativity that is the end state for an agentic enterprise to deliver to the market.
Frankly, it's a compelling version of, and I would share that there's probably not a for-profit leader or a non-profit leader in the audience today that doesn't want to win. Right, that doesn't want to be a market leader and outdistance their competition. Josh, would love to get your take on where is this headed? If we're 10 years from now and we're looking back, okay, that was the end state of the agentic enterprise. Where is this headed?
Yeah, he stole everything I was going to say, Ben. So I'm kidding. To me, I think there's a couple dynamics that are happening. I think the end game is you have to recognize that first, the computing paradigm is fundamentally shifting, and so that computing paradigm is collapsing, and so how we actually interact with computers and systems flow into design is shifting. And so 10 years from now, I think it's a little far out. I think it's a little, a stretch to think that AI is going to be running everything, even 10 years. But I would just say that AI forms an operating system. And that operating system, there's roles and responsibilities in organizational design that actually start to rationalize around this, comprehensive operating system. And it actually redefines and collapses roles. And they don't go away, but there becomes operators. And operators are thinking about this operating system and wielding it in a way that is cross-value chain. So it's very horizontal. And the end game is actually a reformation of business architecture. It's reintegration into an AI-oriented operating system. And organizational design actually structures in a way that people think horizontally instead of roles and responsibility. And so roles and responsibility, you have to understand that the fundamental issue with AI is we typically design AI systems based on use cases and personas. And I think we're actually designing it incorrectly. And so when you think of it purely as an operating system, and you think about operators across value chain, that's really what the end game is going to hold. And if you jump to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about kind of the pathway there. But An end game is a rationalization of the tech estate. And so work pattern redesign flows into the operating system itself. People's jobs and responsibilities change through that proxy. And so we know that an AI-dominant organization itself is someone that doesn't necessarily define itself by organizational hierarchies. And so those organizational hierarchies collapse in a sense that people really look at value chain horizontally. We've got an AI operating system filled with agents or skills repositories, and they're driving market share and profitability at an unprecedented pace and size. And so to me, that's the end game. And I actually don't think it's 10 years. I mean, I think we're looking at fairly significant strategy that refines the organizational fabric and creates collections of skills and repositories that execute business strategy by the end of the year. I think the scaffolding that will run this operating system in the future, these patterns will be architected right now. And then we'll start scaling the business really in 2017, or 2027, 2028, 2029 around this core operating concept.
Josh, one question that comes to my mind is that, look, I think this vision is easier if you're starting a business. If you're starting a business, you can create an agentic enterprise, and in many ways an autonomous enterprise, pretty quickly. How does this change when you're building this into an existing business? A lot of our clients are in supply chain and distribution, our healthcare providers, our banks. How do you put this scaffolding in and this architecture in 1 year?
Yeah, so I think there's a pattern for the agentic scaffolding. So I think that's fairly simplistic, and it's loosely coupled in modularity. Modularity is key. And so you can look at all the independent parts and they kind of fit together and form this almost Lego blocks of intelligence, right? From the data layer all the way up to like interpretation and reasoning, and then process-oriented Lego blocks, and then all the way up to business strategy. And so to me, the tech play here on the left of kind of this end game, I think it's a very project-oriented deployment of technology. And so you got to know what you're doing, and you got to design it with the end in mind. I think the next issue to the question you asked specifically, bottom up is super important. I think we've got to actually bring the workforce along with us. And so we often talk about this paradox, and I think you alluded to it as well, Tanvir, where is AI going to let less people do more? It's actually not. I think if I close this competency gap, creating an AI workforce that's really skilled within the technology, what happens? They actually reinvent the business themselves. So if you're comparing that to like a startup, you can almost do it from the ground up, and it's rather simplistic. But if you actually have a pre-existing business, you got to actually close the skill gap first. And what comes out of that skill gap is actually harvesting work pattern redesign. And so your people are actually, if you teach them and if you give them the tooling within that scaffolding, they'll actually reshape your business. And so it'll start on a department level, I think. And so I don't think on personas and use cases, I mentioned that before, it's far too narrow. I think when you look at a competent group like a department, what will shape is actually department interfunction. And so as we build tooling, foundational agentic tools for people to simulate and think, they start to build operative agents to almost think about task automation. And then you think of interdepartment functions where I've got cross flow, they start to connect the dots themselves. And so if you get that part right, it actually self-solves the problem. And so I don't think we prescribe this top-down strategy on how to reshape your business. I think if you focus on the bottom up, they'll actually reshape it from within inside. And so that, when you think about the end game, that actually does a couple things. It also helps us rationalize the tech estate. So if people are rethinking business process relative to innovating with AI at a different scale, they're actually giving us the blueprint on what technology I can actually chop out of my enterprise. And so I think we get it often backwards. We get really excited by what's on LinkedIn. Somebody says we're going to go charge for it and build all this technology. And then we hope everyone uses it. And so what I see is that happening often. I think if you focus on people closing that competency gap, building a really talented AI workforce where they're thinking about how to use it, they assemble the patterns themselves, just like in our end game pattern here, this playbook, where that's actually step one. Functional team benefit, that actually creates work pattern shifts, and that helps you rethink the computing estate, which is really a primary driver into tech spend analysis, which rationalizes where you're spending your technology and money. That's all flows into organizational redesign. That's the end game.
I love that you're giving people tools to help redesign your business. That's really, really compelling. Tanvir?
Yeah, a lot of what Josh said, especially when it comes to established companies, large companies, it's really the people end of the day, because that's where your bottleneck is, your change management issues are. But then imagine 10 years from now, a similar size company with a similar revenue output, how many employees do you think that companies will have? So when it comes to looking out of the company, outside into the marketplace and the competition, so what's the course and who's your competition? Your strategy has to be intermingled with that, right? So how do you win in that? And a lot of what Josh said applies there. What are your strengths? What are your knowledge bases? What are your systems of record? Years of data that you have that can be your edge related to someone else who is still discovering the market. And so can you use that to uncover new sources of growth? Can you drive that then back into your workforce and enable them with toolkits, not in a way where, as the famous saying goes, agents everywhere, but not a drop to drink. That's not the enterprise you want to be in. You want to be in an enterprise where the scaffolding, as you said, exists, and you have an enterprise-grade approach to how you build agents and agentic framework such that it rewires the business processes that are critical, be it the supply chain side, be it on the growth side with how you go to market and how you do category management in the case of P&G. And so there's a fine balance between what we would like to call an agentic enterprise versus an agentic workforce. The two need to work hand in hand, and that's a very difficult problem for a large company, but it's a challenge they must overcome if they want to be the horse that actually wins the race.
I think that's exactly right. I think an agent for everything is actually a rise of point solutions. And I think if you think, we have spreadsheet sprawl, when people start building agents for just about every single thing and no canonical scheme or repetitive design pattern, it actually is pandemonium. And so trying to govern and harvest and to get some sort of efficiencies, it doesn't happen. The end game is a symbiotic relationship between the workforce and the right amount of agents. And that interfunction, meaning how humans work and scale together, that agentic-oriented team, that's the right makeup. And it doesn't mean that there's more agents is better. It's actually less is better.
Couldn't agree more.
Perfect. So we've talked about where the end goal is. Look, I think in any journey you want to know where your end goal is, but you also have to have a starting place. I was talking with a colleague today, and I think many organizations don't know where to start. And so, Josh, I think you've given a clear map, and Tanvir, you've added commentary of where we're headed as an organization. But Tanvir, I'll give this over to you first. Is where do we start? What is the right place to start from an agentic transformation? And what is the current state of how people are starting today, where you see, so that they can reach that end goal?
Yeah, and different companies in the market are in different life stages of this, right? We have gone through the birth of Gen AI to being able to build agents to building agentic workforces and agentic business workflows. And so if you're just starting, I would almost argue don't treat it as a tech experiment. Make the agentic AI transformation and toolkit that you have in hand intersect with your business priorities. And to me, that's where you start if you are just starting. But a lot of companies actually, at this point in time, they have their lighthouse wins. So they have built agents and agentic workflows along the key business workflows of interest, using the workforce that actually knows that business today in collaboration with their tech unit. I think the challenge there I see in terms of the next phase of evolution is really another analogy. You have water supply into a township. All the pipes have been laid, water is flowing, but the water quality is such that nobody can drink. It's a dead city. And I think that's the real problem when it comes to production-grade scale, where you have not just built agents, but it's actually delivering day in, day out dollar value for your organization, be it the bottom line or be it on the top line side. And so that I see as the next stage maturity for a lot of them. And then there are other enterprises who have risk and governance as a core angle. If you're in banking or even in healthcare, your enterprise-grade observability, visibility, governance, security, these are all first-order problems. And so a lot of organizations are looking to mature on that. The challenge there is not just of business priorities and what the regulations require, but also the tech maturity in terms of your tech stack. And so that's evolving fast. Google made a lot of announcements that say, like, every agent is an asset, and it needs to be monitored. It needs to be in a registry. Its quality needs to be understood. Its identity needs to be managed. Is it a first-class citizen or not, right? Like an agent, if it's part of your workforce, it's not just an assistant. It might be the workforce. Does it have identity? Is it a first party? So a lot of this tech stack evolution is another area of maturity that I think is sort of next order of priority as we look at the current state in my thoughts. Yeah.
Josh, what would you share, if we spend a lot of time with companies right now of helping them think through, and we've developed a framework called Agent Development Framework. How would you help paint the picture of the current state of the agentic enterprise?
If this was baseball, it'd be inning one.
We're at the start.
We're at the very beginning. I don't think people are behind. I think we're maybe first or second inning. What I can tell you is I can share statistics. When you look at distribution of where we have agentic transformation, it's single digits by department and function. And so what that tells me, I'm not even in inning one with business teams. And so where I actually have considerable mass growing, it's actually in IT from an engineering point of view. But even that, I would actually give that a first inning play because we're using it to generate lines of code, maybe commit code, but we're actually not actually shipping features faster. And so I think it's just a utility. And so to me, where the agentic enterprise is it's actually we're using it simply as an extension tool. And so we haven't actually turned ourselves into, this is now my computing paradigm where I do all my thinking, where I do all my planning, where I do all my transactions, where I actually conduct business. Mm-hmm. And so the agentic enterprise is actually that in and of itself. And so when people use it simply as a utility, we don't see the maturity where I think it's going to go. However, I will tell you the speed and the velocity where we are getting, closing that skill gap, literacy and fluency with respect to kind of AI thinking, those teams, that department, are producing at a 10x pace of innovation. They're actually outpacing IT and engineering in terms of like thinking about how to refactor business teams or processes. And so I think if you get the technology right and the configurations, and people are, it'll start to scale. But inning one for me in all categories.
So we're very early. Tanvir, you'd agree that we're very early?
I would absolutely agree, although I do think if you talk to the board and the CEOs,
we have to tell we're in inning five. We're in inning five, Tanvir.
Your margin cut is here. Like the goal is for this year. It's not for next year. And if you are aggressive enough, your growth goals reflect the same. And so I do think from a business priority perspective, we are here. From ability to deliver against our agents and agentic framework against that business goal, I think we are, as Josh just said, early innings.
Yeah, 2024 was all about exploratory investments. And so we spent a lot of time, kicking the tires on what Gen AI was and how somebody would use it. Can it work in business context? Can I understand it? Is it safe to use? Does it hallucinate? Can I depend on it? We were really exploring. 2025, we started to build some rails around like how can I consistently scale an enterprise with this technology aligned to someone's function in the department for a role, right? And so we started to think about that. In 2026, that's now in place. And I think we've got security, architecture, certifiability, ISO standards, ethics kind of built into the system. And so now I think 2026, the current state is we're going to get velocity. I think it's going to really weave into work process really well, but you got to close that skills gap, and otherwise we're going to stay in inning one.
That's fantastic. So we've talked a lot about the end state, and we've talked a little bit about the current state. If I look back over my past couple of days of conversations with CIOs and CTOs and technology leaders, I would argue to you that people in large part are kind of in three different categories of where they are sitting today in 2026. I would say number one is, I think there are some people that are a bit frozen, meaning, where do I start? Gosh, I haven't started yet. I don't quite, and all of this technology, am I behind? Am I, so I think there's that category. I feel the vast majority of people are in a camp of that they're a bit in the muck. They feel that they're up to their knees, and with actually a lot of different priorities. Josh, you've talked about getting your data in shape. You've talked about building scaffolding. We've talked a lot about, training our people. Tanvir, you have said, it's not just a matter of agents, it's actually a matter of training people to be an agent enabled, so it's not just a point solution. And then I think the third category of CIO that I've talked to a few that are actually kind of frustrated by this because the promise of AI is so high at this point, and I think their business users get very excited, but many aren't quite able to deliver yet. So as you're advising, I know you guys spend a lot of time with executives advising them. where do you begin is what I would ask. And Josh, I'll start with you, is what is step one right now so that you can, as a CIO, either get out of the mud, get started, or help meet your business owner, and so that you can help them achieve that end goal eventually?
To me, I think it's all about measurement. And so I think absent of measurement, everything is a rumor. And so, I find most organizations, people are using it and are wondering what adoption really means, and how do you even classify adoption in terms of its usefulness? It's a fundamental issue. So it's a fallacy in AI in general. And so I would say we've come up with a concept called tokenomics. And tokenomics is really the theory of the token input classified in intent and purpose. Does it actually help someone in their job? So it's job classification. And so I know what their job is and the roles and responsibility are. Are they actually using the token relative to their job? Does it actually perform better? And so if you don't have that type of measurement system, then you'll never understand the meaning of good. And you'll never be able to qualify whether adoption is actually producing anything from an ROI perspective. And so to me, get your arms around tokenomics. And so that's actually the material plan on how that token cost fits on the P&L. Meaning the token cost is very similar and close to the salary line item. Agents sit on the P&L like headcount do. And so you have to have that common measurement system, and it's kind of based around what I would consider activity-based costing. And so tokens can be classed in a very similar manner, and then we can interpret that into behavioral strategy measurement, and the tokenomics is it a good use? What we often find is that, we study this often, but we find that the people that we think are the most skilled in AI are actually not, and the people that don't talk about AI are actually using it more than anybody. And when we first start studying, why adoption isn't actually, spiking, the people are using AI for all the wrong reasons relative to their job function. So that's not a technology problem. That's a people problem. That's a competency issue. It's a training and education problem. We have to teach them the pattern. I would liken it to when we brought laptops in the 90s into the workforce. I'm old enough to know when that happened, and if you got one, you were special. But we didn't really know what to do with it all day. And you bring it home, we still didn't know what to do with it. And I would think we were in this very similar situation with AI. I've got this computing, power. It can do a lot of things for me, but I haven't really thought about really how I maximize it. And then as an organization, I don't know how to measure that. And so tokenomics is 100% the number one thing that everybody should think about. And if you get your scaffolding right, your agentic architecture right, tokenomics comes with it. And if you have agentic scaffolding and you don't have common measurement, this is a fundamental problem.
Yeah, and it's as I was meeting with the CIO earlier this week, and she had shared, it's actually we're in an interesting time right now, because on this, you're all about measurement. It's about measurement, and we want to let people experiment and to pick this up and to learn this.
That's right.
Right? But we also want to race to efficiency. Right? We also want to race to, and so it's a little bit of and I think if you get your baseline set, then you can start tracking, hey, here's how much we're spending on AI, but here's some of the efficiencies that we're gaining or the excess productivity. But it is interesting for a manager to step back and say, how do I strike that balance between letting somebody learn, but also seeing some efficiency gains?
This is also not a technology problem. This is MBOs and OKRs and things that we think about in terms of organizational strategy. So how do we incentivize our teams to actually think about using these utilities in a way that actually benefit them as an individual contributor? And then how do I crowdsource that up to then share across my teams, creating a normalization of skill? Asking an employee to think like that is not an easy conversation. And so you have to kind of ease into it. So tokenomics gives us the basis for that common measurement. It also gives us the basis for really managing the efficacy and the cost controls around which component parts of the scaffolding are too costly. So for me, start with the measurement, and I can have reinforcement in learning and education to close that skills gap. MBOs and OKRs can actually be refactored and then realign, harvesting of that, sharing across people. That's the flywheel effect that we want to see in terms of, really good strategy with how AI flourishes in an organization. Once that starts, the innovators actually start to build the pattern themselves. And so if you've got the right foundation, you've got the right literacy and fluency mechanics, you have the right tokenomics, what happens is you get really velocity of innovation. And so then leaders that are actually responsible for AI strategy have to step back and measure it all and figure out which pieces do I actually materialize as corporate strategy, how do I rationalize maybe too many agents, it becomes a measurement game. And so it's not Big Brother, it's almost like a cultural reinforcement strategy, but that's my long-winded answer for.
That's great. Tamer, same question is, look, where do you start? where do you come back and advise a CIO or a CTO or even a COO that says, hey, I want to build AI into my operations or into my go-to-market team? How would you advise him or her?
Yeah, let me first build into what Josh covered, right?
Great.
Essentially what I hear is you can't impact what you can't measure. So measure. And the only refinement I would do to it is measure what matters. And so if you have both going on, you have the right measurement framework across your enterprise to understand usage and the classes of the intent around which people are using it. And you know what their job functions are, and therefore you can baseline if I've understood tokenomics right. Then you have a great start in terms of the data that you need to drive organizational decisions. And as simple people who make business decisions, you know no two decisions are equal. And so therefore, if you measure what matters, it will really drive your business forward. A CPG business is fundamentally different than financial services, is different than healthcare, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing that strikes me when I hear, because it's such a powerful concept. The first time I heard it from Josh, it took me a little bit to understand. I've spent my career, just for you guys know, about 10 to 15 years in just driving marketing and growth measurement. So if you have GM and you spend multi-billion dollars in marketing, and by the way, at Google has been my client, you spend multi-billion dollars in marketing, how do you make sure it's giving you the right return on investment? And so I totally believe in that framework. I think the only other things, Ben, I could add to it is there's few things that different companies are wrestling with. Some of the companies are wrestling with what I call, first of all, even evangelizing. So it can actually drive impact. In other words, the CIO, CTO are trying to win over their business counterparts onto this journey. And so right now, some of them are taking the easy route. I call it the easy route because you can roll out Gemini for enterprise for everybody and assume business transformation happens. I think there's a little bit of more difficult route, but you cannot do it at scale because your job is CIO, CTO. You're not the business guy. So how do you impact? And that's where the lighthouse use case example, I think, is really useful. So I would advise do that. Make sure you have something to evangelize in your organization and have a regular sprinkle of that happening throughout the year. It's easy enough to do it. Many of the organizations are doing it today. Intentionality matters, and it can be delivered. The second area, in my opinion, is really about the CIOs and CTOs creating the harness around which bottom-up innovation of the agentic workforce can be driven, such that by definition, you get the software design patterns on, are you creating a level 0 agent? Are you creating a level 1 agent? Is it a level 2 orchestrator agent that is accomplishing multiple tasks, maybe even across business units? And so that's, if you really think about digital underwiring of an enterprise, that's the entire software paradigm. And so there's hardcore technology decisions to be done around that for agent and agentic architectures, a similar paradigm needs to exist. And that will have security, scalability, many other aspects baked into it. The third one, in my opinion, is sort of when the dust settles, what will be left is what do you have to show differently than anyone else in the marketplace? And that, to me, is fundamentally the data strategy of that company. I find most of the large organizations have their data really not organized in a way that agents can take probabilistic decisions with the right context. They're often taking decisions in incomplete context, and worse still, context is missing. And even if they have the right data and organized in a proper data lake with a medallion architecture and everything else going on for them, it's missing the business interpretation. So the ontologies, the semantics that actually matter. And so layering those in a catalog layer to provide that right context matters. So fundamentally to me, what I would advise them is if you haven't started on that journey, it's about time that you should get serious about it, because that's critical once you have solved for this engineering workflow of an engineering enterprise. That is my example of that water supply system. The quality of the water needs to be consumed for it to deliver value in terms of dollars, and your data is the key to that. And so spend in your data today, get serious about it, have an enterprise data strategy and a real data platform against which your agents can optimize your business.
If I can add to that, if the question is, in 2026, what can we do to accelerate progress? And if data is typically the thing that slows us down, what I find often is that organizations have a very common issue. We don't have our data ready for AI, so I can't scale. We are not using AI to solve that as a problem. So we're actually limiting the AI distribution and innovation by not applying AI to solve kind of the data supply chain issue at scale. Contextual enrichment, organization, semantic formation, knowledge graphs, like these are all things that I don't need a human to use a circa 2000 engineering pattern, medallion architecture. I don't need humans to design data for AI without actually using AI. And so I would just say, if you've got a data problem, you got to really think about like how AI is playing a massive role in that data supply chain, right? Even contextual enrichment, as you mentioned, in terms of framing an organization. And so that way, we're not talking in 2027 that I'm still on this data journey. Like 2026 and forward, like there's no more data journey. Data is ready, right? And so AI is actually working alongside of people to facilitate that water supply, like in a much faster velocity. I don't think we can afford to be reimagining, data modernization in 2027. 2026, we put it to bed. There's a RIP on that one.
Josh, what I love about where you're going with that is even the software development life cycle of a data product. Like the engineers are the best guys to use AI. And so how do you shorten that life cycle? That agentic SDLC is a key component to moving that forward at a faster pace and velocity if you're, let's say, struggling with making fast enough moves to actually deliver end value versus a data product that only your engineering team knows how to use it. In best case scenario, you have a business intelligence team on the business side that is still looking rear view, descriptive stats versus anything that is actionable tomorrow, or better still, directly in a system of record, in a system of interaction, real-time consumptions of API with real predictions such that you can take real mass-scale personalization decisions or drive your promotions or drive your pricing such that you could sort of actually drive business impact. So I would completely agree. There's so much opportunity here. I think a lot of toolings are here and now, and I think we should sort of prioritize that.
So what we're saying then is that in 2026, we're going to solve the data supply chain issue by using AI to power that data supply chain.
Well said.
The second part is that foundational data-oriented agents, subject matter experts of that data, are going to be made available to each team, because I would just say, hypothesize, every agentic transformation has foundational simulation a part of it. And simulation is predicated in tightly coupled to data analysis. And so if I attach all my people and all my the people to data at SMEs at scale, they'll actually think, simulate, plan better. And if I think about tying to operative agents, I can create orchestration. But if I have a data supply chain problem, I can't actually facilitate any of that. So AI's got to play a huge role in 2026 to solve the data supply chain problem. AI has to play a better role in creating data subject matter expert agents. Business teams can actually simulate with these data agents in and around thinking within their work process, which is step one in actually work process pattern redesign. And then if I can measure that as an AI practitioner, right, with tokenomics, then I can see the evolution of all that.
Completely agree.
Gentlemen, where I would love to wrap up this conversation, maybe we can save a couple of minutes for questions, is what does this mean for people? First panel I ever sat on was about 4 years ago at Google Next, and it was a panel on Gen AI. Gen AI was very, very new, and one of the questions the panel came to is what does this mean? It's being honest. In the back of our mind is people and a business, we're a consulting firm where we have people working for us. It's in the back of all of our minds of saying, what does the end state and what does what you're currently going through mean for your people that work for you at 66 Degrees in a consulting and a solution firm, but also for your customers' people? Tanvir, I'll start with you.
I'll keep it short. I will build on my initial analogy that I started with. I think, my message to my team members, first and foremost, is be the horse that wins the race. And if you can't win the race with the car, change the course. Take a hilly course, take the shorter route, the car will still go around, the horses can traverse different terrain. And so that amount of drive to win then results in drive to learn, be the know-it-all, not be the learn-it-all, not the know-it-all, as one of the Stanford professors articulated, but Satya Nadella kind of talked about it further. I think these two are sort of core. And then underlying it, there's a lot of enablement that we do today, day in, day out, in terms of our delivery life cycle. We are a professional services consulting company. For our company, there's a life cycle to how we go about understanding a client's problem, because today we are dealing with a financial services client. Today it's a healthcare client. Tomorrow it's a supply chain problem. Another day it's a marketing problem. Another day it's a foundational data engineering problem, so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of context switching. So how do I train my people to be in a harness where they can deliver with quality, and yet context can be provided through agents to them to do their core expertise work in a better manner? And so that's kind of where our focus has been. It's an evolving space. I think technology is changing every day. You meet best of our AI architects. They're learning every day. They're excited about it. They're not scared about it. And then there's talent filtering. End of the day, if you're not a horse that wants to win the race but just survive, you need to be at a different place.
Josh?
I think, what this means for our customers, people, is I think it really unpacks kind of the original intent of their business. They typically serve customers, and they have a broader mandate. And so, I think it allows people to actually scientifically evolve, to perform and execute that mandate at a different pace. And so whether that's to scale a business, or whether it's to win market share, or whether it's to drive profit, but you're ultimately serving a customer's purpose. And so I think AI now takes the shackles off a little bit for us to be a little more aggressive to maybe reach some of those goals. And I think for people, I think that's interesting. I think it creates an interesting opportunity to evolve as well, the general understanding of what a job responsibility is. Because I no longer am shackled by, maybe the boundaries of my roles and responsibilities that were pre-existing, for the last 30 years. Like, my role today may be cross-functional because I'm quite capable. And so if I have quite capable people, then I can actually execute a business strategy and reform business architecture to achieve a business mandate at a very different way. And so to me, it's the most interesting time to ever be in technology, because I think this will be the largest time that we impact the fundamental purpose that we have and redefine what it really means to be a business. So like what we know as a bank will likely change, because it'll likely envelope slightly different around customers in terms of kind of this always-on proxy, and the AI is going to allow us to serve them in such a multitude of ways beyond what we currently have. And so to be a person at a company serving that as a potential strategy and intent, to me, is the most interesting time to be alive in IT. And so I think there are going to be some people that are really excited by that, and these are the team members that I think you have to invest in and allow them to learn the tools, take the patterns, and deploy the scaffolding, right? Reinvent the work pattern and scale that. They'll actually pull along. It's about 10%. We see about 10% of departments actually are the thought leaders of using AI. And so if you have a department of 20 people, that means you literally have 2 people that are really going to push the envelope of thinking. But those people are so important, because what they do is they'll inspire about 50% more. And so the other 50% are really going to be able to say, you know what, we can do this, and we can rethink the business architecture and the overall operating model of our company. And so there's the other percentage, and they're just not going to be interested. And so they'll either age out or retire and so on. But I think great opportunity to be in business, great opportunity to win in business, great opportunity for people to rethink everything.
Yeah, I think that where we started this conversation, and Tanvir, you believe you kicked us off, was the end state here, where this is ending, is how can we have this technology, how can we have AI and agents help companies win, help companies outdistance their competitors. And what I hear you both saying is how can we equip our people, but the people that will particularly thrive in this environment are those that help their businesses win, that pick up, adopt this technology, understand technology to help customers or our customers and companies win, but also by virtue of doing that, serve their customers better and serve their end purpose better.